So I mentioned this is where things start to get a little bit grim. Um, so at this point, my grandpa comes in and he's introducing these new ideas. Um, and I think that they're all well and good and they make sense. But again, he even admits, he says that he quote unquote cast pearls to swine and that my mom and dad misinterpreted them and misused them. And he says that what they did isn't as complicated. He says they incorporated them into their lower levels of software. So he thinks that my mom has predator prey or orientation software where she's predatory toward me, and same thing with my dad. And he says that they took his ideas and they assimilated them into that lower level of software and they used that against me. And he admits, he says, I cast pearls of swine. They weren't ready for it. And he says that he quote unquote gave answers before the questions were asked. He said that they didn't ask any questions and he was giving answers before they were ready. And so, but then I tell him, I was like, well, then why don't you try to undo that and explain this to them? But he says, no, because I can't do that because they haven't asked any questions. Once they ask the questions, then I'll do that. But I'm like, okay, well, you already screwed it up this bad. But regardless, it was a tough situation. But at the same time, like I do think that my grandpa just he also in this, and even to this day, like at that time he came in and he didn't know how good of a basketball player I was. He came from Kauai. So he just comes in and he sees me playing with these guys and playing in high school, and he didn't even know I was a starting point guard on varsity as a freshman. I remember it was just like 2017. I was showing my grandpa videos of when I played basketball when I was younger, and I showed him a video of me playing as a freshman starting on varsity. And my grandpa was like, "You started on varsity?" And I was like, "Yeah." He was like, Ronaldo Woolridge didn't play on varsity? Ronaldo Woolridge like played in the NBA, and he was like a very big player, and he was played in my year, and he didn't play varsity as a freshman. And I was like, "No, he didn't. I did." And my grandpa was like, "What?" He was like confused because he was like, in his mind, I don't think that he thought that I was that good, but it's because he came in during that really bad time. So he, in his mind, and I talked about this like in 2013 when I was living with him on Kauai. I tried to explain to him about the shoe wave machine for the first time ever, and I said, my grandpa, it was a shoe wave machine that messed up my shot, and that's what messed up everything. And my grandpa, he clapped his hands, he started to laugh, and he said, it wasn't a shoe wave machine. He said it was because you were playing against bigger and better players, and you just got frustrated, then you took out the frustration on your dad, and then your dad started to defend himself, and that's what happened. So my grandpa wanted to make me into the bad guy, and he didn't know what was going on. So anyways, but my grandpa at this point, he was teaching me good stuff. Like I said, I was learning good philosophy from him, but he did not help me in my situation. So he's telling me, I need help with my shot from my dad. My whole life, my dad helped me with my shot, and I don't know what's wrong with my shot. I don't know the shoe is messing up my shot. I don't know how good shooters shoot at that time. I hadn't studied it. My whole life I was so good because I was just unconscious and I just played, but now I'm practicing wrong. So I'm trying to fix it, and I feel like I need my dad. But then my grandpa's telling me that, because my dad's deciding that, no, I'm going to make it capricious, and I'm going to just decide when I'm going to help you shoot when I want to. And I might, wait not shoot with you for a month. And my grandpa's like, well, Ryan, if that's what your dad decides, you have to learn to accept bad calls. You have to learn to accept his calls. And you have to learn to accept that everything is just fine and learn trust. And then so my grandpa tried to explain like that the universe is I guess Martin Luther King said that the arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. So my grandpa was like, the universe is moving toward justice and things are developing toward the right way. So he's like, you just have to trust. So, and I understand that, like, it's true that I was trying to quote unquote, make things happen. My grandpa's big thing was, don't make things happen. Don't try to force things. And he was saying, you're trying to force your dad to help you and that stuff. And I desperately needed help. I felt like I needed help, and I was trying to force him. So, and that's what my mom was. So he was basically kind of like trying to confirm what my mom was saying. My mom was like, okay, well, Ryan's obsessive. He has obsessive compulsive disorder, and he's trying to, force his dad to help him. So this is what's going on at that point. So, but my dad is trying to help me. So I would be shooting, and my dad would, I'll just give some examples of what was going on at that time. So I remember my dad came to one of my games. That was another problem. I wanted my dad to go to my games, and I talked to a psychologist about that, and my dad would be capricious with that, like I said. And I wanted him to go, not because I just wanted him to go to my games, but because I wanted him to look at my shot to see what was up with my shot. So he came to one of my games, and I think we were playing modern day, and I played really bad because like I said, my shot was screwed up, everything was messed up at that time. So then after the game, my dad was driving me and my friend Zane. Zane was like a 6'6" Chinese guy. He ended up playing basketball at Harvard, but he drove me and Zane back. But my dad was very mad after the game, and he said something to me like, he was like, dude, he was like, you suck now. I forget exactly how he said, but he was like, you suck now. He said, you're not going to play in the NBA. He said, you're not going to play professional basketball. He's like, you're terrible now. And Zane was with me, and my dad was just really angry, and he was like driving crazy. And then he like ran. Oh, my dad always had anger problems, so he like almost like ran a dude off the road, and then he went in front of the guy and he started spraying him with water. Like he turned on his windshield wipers so that the water from the windshield wipers so that they would spray him from behind. And then like Zane was kind of like, he was mortified. This is my friend. And then finally we got back to like, we dropped Zane off, and then we got back to my place, and my dad was just really upset. And then, basically the conflict would continue with my dad. And as I said, abuse was starting to happen. So I started to go to school with black eyes and like with marks on me and stuff. And then Zane, I remember he after like when I think we were driving in the bus to one of our games, and Zane, I think it was Zane and probably Ronaldo. I forget. It was probably Zane. He was like, Ryan. Yeah, it was Zane. He said, Ryan, is your dad beating you up? And I was like, and I didn't say anything. And he was like, because he noticed that I had black eyes. He was like, you have a black eye. He was like, tell me, like, is your dad beating you up? And I was like, no, my dad's not beating me up. And Zane was looking at me like he could tell that something was going on. And then my dad told me that, like, I think it was after school that day or like maybe later that week, my dad told me, Ryan, Zane was like looking at me really angry, like menacingly. And then he was like, did you tell him that I was hitting you or whatever? And I was like, and I told him, I was like, no, I didn't tell him that. And the reason why I didn't tell anybody was because in my mind, it felt like I needed my dad, and I didn't want my dad to get in trouble. Now, the same thing would happen when my mom would send me to the psychologist. My mom told me, do not tell the psychologist that your dad's hitting you or that your dad's hurting you, because if you do, he's going to go to jail, and then you're not going to have anybody to help you fix your shot. So, and that's what I really wanted. That's what I really felt I needed, and it's true. I did need it, and I really did not know what was wrong with my shot. So I didn't tell the psychologist. I didn't tell anybody about that. Now, just like one more example of that was I got in a fight with my dad and that same type of thing. And I went and I walked to my grandparents' house. My grandparents lived like 5 minutes away. And my grandpa saw that I had a black eye or whatever. I had probably a bump on my head or something. And my grandpa said, was like, Ryan, is your dad beating you up? And I told my grandpa, I was like, no, he's not beating me up. And he said, yes, your dad's beating you up. He said, I'm calling the police. But then I was like, Grandpa, don't do it. I was like desperate. I was like, Grandpa, please. I was like, Grandpa, please don't do it. Because I felt like I really needed my dad. Like, I need this guy more than anything. And if he calls the police and my dad goes to jail, then I'm going to be screwed. Then I'm never going to fix my shot. And I didn't know it was a shoot-away machine. But then my grandpa was like, and then my grandpa was trying to explain to me, like, you're much smarter than your dad, and, you're a really smart person, your dad's not. And my grandpa didn't have much respect for my dad. But so this is kind of what was going on at the time. Now, I understand what my mom, as I said, my mom's very contemptuous of me at this point. So I'll just give some examples of the type of fights that would go on. So like my dad would be holding me in the chokehold. And as he's holding me in the chokehold and like banging me, my mom would be there looking at me. And my mom would be like, look at how ugly he is. Look at all the zits on your face. And then I remember like one time she was like, I don't remember exactly how she says it, but she's very mean and calling a lot of names. And again, at this point, she was very contemptuous of me. She didn't know it was a shoot-away machine. She thought there was something wrong with me, and also the obsessive thing. She's like, oh, you have obsessive compulsive disorder or something. And I might have obsessive compulsive stuff, but again, none of this would have happened if it wasn't for the shoot-away machine. I know for a fact. So I remember one time she was like saying how ugly I was as my dad was beating me up and how I had all these zits on my face. So then I started scratching the zits on my face. And then my mom was like screaming at me like how ugly I am and how, that type of stuff. So this is what's going on. So my mom's demonstrating her hatred toward me at this point. She doesn't have a lot of respect for me. This is where her contempt for me started to really develop. And then my dad is also developing that same contempt. So I remember one time my dad was driving me to a basketball practice. Now, again, at this point, I was moving back and forth from living with my grandpa and living with my dad. And my dad wasn't going to a lot of my stuff. And my dad, like I said, my whole life, he would go to every one of my practices and every one of my games. But now he would drop me off at the practice and he wouldn't go into the practice. And also at the same time, like my mom was known for, I remember my bus driver, when I was like in middle school, the bus driver was like, the thing I love about your mom, Ryan, is she's always like the first person here to pick you up, and she's never late, and she like, she really loves you and all that stuff, and you're like, you have the best mom ever. But at this point, I remember my mom started to pick me up late from school, and like when she'd pick me up, she'd have like contempt for me, and like she started to not like me. And so I remember one time my dad was driving me to my practice, and I forget exactly how it was brought up, but my dad was like, told me like, yeah, basically, Ryan, you're crazy. And I was like, well, like, what are you talking about? He said, well, this is the way I know that you're crazy. He said, I raised you and your sister, and I raised you guys both the same, but you're crazy and your sister's not. So he was trying to say that it didn't have anything to do with with him, or he was just trying to say that I'm crazy. There's something wrong with me. Now, there was something wrong at the time. It was the shoot-away machine. I know that, and that this was what was going on. But at the time, I didn't know that. So basically, my point, though, is what I'm trying to get across is my parents at this point had developed an idea that I had a mental illness. And that this was like the 10th grade or 11th grade. This was 11th grade in high school. That I was mentally ill and that I had a problem with me. And that's why they thought that my shot was messed up. And that's why they thought that there was problems going on. They didn't know it was a shooting machine. And I know for a fact, if it wasn't for the shooting machine, none of this would have happened. So then the 12th grade, I ended up moving in with my friend Afam, who was, I went to middle school with him, and he was Nigerian, and his dad was really rich, and I lived with him. He had like a mansion, and it was a nice, a nice place to stay, but I was, very distraught because I wanted to be with my parents. And I'll just give like one other example of a fight that happened in 11th grade before the 12th grade was, and this is with my grandpa, I was, basically the same thing. I'm like, Dad, I need you. One of the things I would tell my dad is like, when I was the best basketball player in the country and stuff, and when I was very good, you would go to all my games, you would shoot with me every day, and now you just do it when I'm doing well, and you don't help me like you used to, you don't care about me anymore, and that type of stuff. But I was just trying to get my dad to shoot with me because I felt like I needed his help. So we're fighting about that, and then my grandpa started to yell at me. He started to yell in my face, and then as he's yelling at me, spit is coming out of his mouth, and it's getting on me. So I said, "Stop yelling at me! You're spitting in my face." And then my grandpa stuck out his tongue and he started going, and he started literally spitting in my face, like intentionally. So then I reached up and I slapped him in the face, and then I hit his eye, and it made one of his eyes partly blind. So like that's an example of what was going on. But then after that, so then my mom's like, "Oh God, you're an elder abuser," and my parents are all mad and everything. But then my grandpa told him, "Wait, no. My grandpa's not. He can be a kind of a good guy." So my grandpa's like, "No, that was my fault." He was like, I got stuck into the soap opera. I got stuck into the drama and the interpersonal realm, and I got absorbed into that, and then there's consequences to that, and that consequence was I got slapped in the face, and he's like, I shouldn't have got absorbed into it like that. So, but my point is, there was a lot of conflict going on, and there was physical stuff going on. Then the 12th grade, I'm living with my friend Afam, and at that point, my shot had been completely destroyed because I didn't know how to fix it. At the time, I hadn't studied basketball. Like now, I've studied enough. It was only in college when I started looking at videos of when I was younger, when I started to connect things and I started to see, oh, this is how I shot. And even to this day, I still don't know exactly. I still want more videos. I want to study more. And not just the way I shot, but I want to study a lot of stuff, of how I moved and stuff like that. But at this point in the 12th grade, my game was completely deteriorated, completely destroyed. So, but at that point also, I had already committed to play at UC San Diego. So it was already okay with that. And I ended up not playing my 12th grade year at high school because things were going so bad with with my family. And I'm not going to go into details about my 12th grade year, but the abuse continued. And I'll just like give one example. Like after one of the games, I got hit in the nose and I had a bloody nose. And then that night, my dad and I got in a fight, and my dad started flicking my nose, and like my nose was bleeding because my dad was flicking it, and he was on top of me, and like fights were going on. It was so intense. Like things were getting so bad. and my everything deteriorated my 12th grade year. And I'm not going to go into details about everything that happened my 12th grade year, but things got bad with the team as well. So I ended up, I'm not going to talk about what happened, but I ended up not playing my 12th grade year. But I already committed to play at UC San Diego, so it was okay. So I didn't play my 12th grade year, and I just stayed up with my friend Afam at his house. So I graduated from high school, and then I went to play at UC San Diego. And then my first year at UC San Diego, I decided to redshirt, and my dad at the time, so now I'm at college, and keep in mind, so I'm in college, and my mom and dad at this point, they don't have very much respect for me. They have a lot of hatred for me. So I'll just like give one example. Was like one time I called my mom, and I'm like, and I told my mom, like, I need a new computer because I had a huge, or I had like a really old bad computer. And my sister, I knew, I don't know how I knew it, but she had like a nice new computer. And also my sister had a Mercedes, but I had a really old car. My mom gave my sister a Mercedes, but she gave me a really old bad car. And so I was like, why does my sister get a computer, like a really nice computer, but I don't? And my mom said, because I like your sister and I don't like you. And she was like, with everything you've done, like all you are, she said something like, all you are is a burden to our family, or something like that. So at this point, you can see there's hatred toward me that has developed, a lot of contempt and hatred for me. So, but now she likes my sister. Now, I didn't get into this before, but it's ironic because I remember when I was growing up, I'll just give one example. I remember being at a soccer game with my sister when I was like in the 7th grade. I mentioned I went to Sierra Canyon, and the coach at Sierra Canyon said I'm a legend. I was like in the 6th grade playing on the 7th grade team, scoring over 20 points a game. Coach said I was probably the best player he's ever coached. And this is the same school that LeBron James's kid now goes to. And I was like a really big time player. And I remember around that time, I went to a game where my sister was playing soccer, and my mom and dad were watching the game. And my mom was like, God, Leah just doesn't like just kick the ball. She's always thinking too much. And my mom was like, Ryan never thinks when he plays. She thinks too much. So my point is, like, at that point, she didn't look very highly upon my sister, but she really looked highly upon me, and she really liked me. And I just, like, one other example of that was, I remember one time when I was really little, there was a crystal salt shaker, and I knocked it over in the pantry, and it fell and it broke. And then my mom saw it later, and my mom started to scream at my sister. She was like, Leah, you broke the salt shaker. This was crystals, really. And she was screaming at her. And then I told my mom, I was like, Mom, it wasn't. And my sister was crying. She was like, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. And I told my mom, I was like, Mom, it was me. It wasn't my sister. And then my mom was like, oh, okay. And then I asked my mom later, I was like, how come you were screaming at Leah, but you didn't get mad at me? And she was like, well, because you're a good boy, but Leah's not, or something like that. So my mom didn't really like my sister so much growing up, but now the ironic thing is now things have changed. So now she's like, because I like your sister, but I don't like you. So that's the beginning of college. And then, but my mom is actually, she was doing things for me, like she was buying me stuff a little bit, and she ended up buying me a computer though. So she said that, but then she ended up buying the computer and doing that type of stuff. But my point though is you could tell that she didn't have very much respect for me, and she thought that there was something wrong with me at that point. But then as college was continuing, I wasn't bringing up anything about basketball, and I stopped asking my dad for help with my shot. I just gave up with that. And I was doing really bad at UCSD. Like, my shot was terrible because I had already been destroyed by the shoot-away machine. So I wasn't playing good, and I redshirted my first year, and then my second year, I ended up quitting after the 3rd game of the season. But people, I know like some of my friends were thinking that I was probably kicked off the team or something, but no, I actually really did quit, and there was someone who quit before me, and he kind of influenced me to quit. But I quit, and then my point is though, I stopped asking my dad for help with my shot, and I kind of like gave up on that. So at this point though, my parents started to kind of like me a little bit more again, I remember. So my parents were started to come to, they came to San Diego to visit me for Thanksgiving and stuff like that. And things were not going so bad at that point, but I'm going to get to where things take the spiral downward in a minute.